This is the Helpful Lockpicker here, and welcome back to my lockpicking homeschool series. The video I have for you today is going over how you can detect spool pins when you are picking a lock. The first thing you want to do is remember the unique shape that a spool pin has. It has a thinner inside diameter and a larger outside diameter. So what happens is when you start to pick these pins, often the plug is stuck on the thinner part of the spool, and as you start to lift it, it migrates down to the thicker part. What happens is, as it is lifting from the thinner part to the thicker part, the plug will start to straighten out and provide some counter rotation. When you do identify a spool, oftentimes you will get counter rotation, and that is how you can start to identify that they are in your lock. What I'd like to do is show you how you can easily start to detect spool pins through the feedback that they provide while you are working on a lock. What I have done is I've set up a Master Lock 911 in the vise, and I've put a protractor up in the background. What we're going to do is take this 40 thousandths top of the keyway tensioner, and I've added a little bit of an extension to it, and we're going to see the counter rotation that the spool pins provide as we are picking the lock. Alright, I have my top of the keyway tensioner loaded up into the lock here, and you can see our neutral positions right between 80 and 85 degrees. And what I'm going to do is use this to show some of the feedback that we get from the spool pins. As we lift up on the spool pin, we'll see the tension wrench start to rotate back, and then it will go back towards its neutral position. This is because a spool pin has a thinner inside diameter where it most naturally sits, and then on the outside diameter is thicker. So as you're starting to lift that spool pin up, it will start to straighten out, which will cause that counter rotation, and then one of two things will happen. One, we will set the spool pin and it will be up and out of the way, or it will drop back down. But either way, we won't be stuck on that thick part of the spool, and it will go back towards its neutral position. One thing that can cause some false feedback is if we start to pick on the warding, that can cause some counter rotation, and that can give us some false feedback. So we always want to be very careful that we are only picking on the pins that we are working on and not the warding. So I'm going to start picking this lock, and I'll go over the feedback as it presents itself. So pin 1, not getting any feedback. Pin 2, getting some counter rotation. Click, and that's set. As I started to lift on it, it set pretty quickly, but I'm sure you're able to tell that the tension wrench did move back a little bit, and we are still at our 85 degree mark. Now let's move on to the next pin. So 1, 2, pin 3, counter, click, and that's set, and we're still at our 85 degree mark. 1, 2, 3, 4. Got a little click, but counter, another click. 4 should be all set. 5, small click. I don't know if you're able to hear it, but we are still right around our 85 degree mark. And then let's go back to key pin 1, the one that wasn't binding earlier. Counter rotation, click, and the lock is now open. So in this lock, I believe that 5 is a standard and 1 through 4 are spools. As you're able to tell, every time we lifted a spool, we'd get that counter rotation back, and it would either set or if it were to drop back down, but either way we would get to that neutral position. I'm going to just pull the hasp open so that this lock will not relock, and go over some of the principles of what we did in summary one more time. So our neutral position on the lock was about 85 degrees. And every time we lifted on a spool pin, we would get that counter rotation going backwards, and then it would come back towards its neutral position. This is because the spool pin has a thinner inside diameter and a thicker outside diameter. So as we're moving from that thinner area towards that thicker area, the spool pin's starting to straighten out. Once we get to the end of the spool pin, we're going to either have it set or it's going to drop back down. But either way, we will go back towards our neutral position. Locks with spool pens, when you have set all the non-spool pens like the standard and serrated pens, another thing that can happen is you can go from the neutral position, say at 85 degrees, and then it can move its way down to a new neutral position of about 100 degrees. This is considered a false set because now you are only sitting on the inside diameter of the spool pen. The lock may have turned like it's going to open, but it has not. At this point, you're going to need to lift on each spool pen, trying to find the one that's giving you the counter rotation, and you'll just keep repeating until the lock opens. It's always important to keep in mind where your spool pins are located in your lock because you can get into a false set at any time, and just knowing where the spool pins are can make it easier for you to find them down the road. Not every lock has as strong a feedback as this Master Lock 911. I picked this lock because I feel like it gives some exaggerated feedback and is a great one to learn on. A lot of the locks, it will be a lot more subtle, but if you can start to build your skill set learning how these present on a lock that is drastically easier to learn on from a feedback standpoint, you'll be much better off when you're moving on to locks that have much more subtle feedback. But either way, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, please subscribe. As always, thank you so much for checking out this video, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you so much.